The new dock blocked my shoreline before my truck even reached the gravel turnoff. HOA crews had built it while I was away, and now 30 residents were standing on my land, tying boats to posts drilled into my lakebed. Fresh lumber smelled sharp in the sun. Waves slapped against new pilings. A blue HOA banner snapped in the wind. My private shoreline, my access path, and my boat ramp had been turned into a community launch point overnight. The whole dock depended on shoreline permits, survey markers, and lake access records I controlled. Richard Collins stood at the end of the boards with a clipboard in his hand. That was his first mistake. He acted like paperwork could erase a property line. I stepped out of my truck and the gravel crunched loud under my boots. A little girl in a pink life jacket pointed at me. Two men loading a cooler stopped talking. Somewhere on the dock, a rope squealed against a metal cleat. Richard looked up and smiled like he had been expecting a complaint, not a problem. "Welcome home, Ethan," he said. "Beautiful improvement, is it not?" I did not answer right away. I looked at the dock first. 24 feet of cedar walkway. 4 boat slips. Solar lights bolted along the rails. A locked storage box near the landing. Whoever built it had not thrown together a weekend project. This was planned. Paid for. Promoted. My name is Ethan Walker. I am 46 years old, and I own the western shoreline of Lake Calder. Not part of it. Not just the grass above the water. The shoreline parcel, the private access strip, and the old launch road that runs down from County Route 11. My father bought it when the lake was still surrounded by pasture. I grew up fixing fence posts there. I learned to back a trailer into the water before I could legally drive on a highway. Then I spent 6 weeks out of state helping my sister after surgery. When I left, there was only my old wooden bench near the water and a rusted post marking the boundary. When I came back, the HOA had built a dock. Richard walked toward me slowly, polished shoes tapping against boards that had no right to be there. Behind him, residents watched like this was a neighborhood. Disagreement over landscaping. He raised his clipboard. The board approved community shoreline access last month. I looked at the nearest piling. Wet concrete residue still stained the water around it. The board does not own this shore. His smile tightened. Our members have used this lake for years. A man behind him muttered something about shared amenities. Another resident kept filming with his phone. The air smelled like sunscreen, cut cedar, and gasoline from a pontoon boat idling too close to the bank. Richard lowered his voice. Do not embarrass yourself in front of the community. That sentence settled colder than the lake wind. I turned away from him and walked toward the old boundary post near the willow tree. The post was still there, but someone had painted over the survey mark. I scraped my thumb across the painted survey mark and felt dried paint flake under my nail. Someone had covered it recently. The white paint was still brighter than the weathered wood beneath it. A few residents watched from the dock. Nobody said a word. The lake breeze carried the smell of cedar and fuel across the shoreline. Richard stayed near the center of the structure with his arms folded. He wanted everyone to see confidence. I wanted facts. I walked back to my truck and opened the steel toolbox behind the cab. The metal latch clicked sharply in the afternoon air. Inside was a worn folder I kept for property maintenance. Old surveys. Utility maps. Boundary photos. Nothing dramatic. Just records. A pontoon boat eased into one of the slips. The driver waved at Richard as if this place had belonged to the HOA forever. That detail stayed with me. Somebody had already convinced people the shoreline was theirs. I spread a laminated survey across the tailgate. The paper crackled in the wind. The nearest boundary marker on the map lined up with the willow tree 20 yards away. Another marker should have been farther down the shoreline near a cluster of rocks. I started walking. Gravel crunched under my boots. Water lapped against the bank beside me. Halfway there, I found something else. The second marker had not disappeared. It had been buried. Fresh soil covered most of the metal cap. I knelt and brushed dirt away with my hand. The engraved survey number was still visible underneath. My pulse slowed. That was important. Very important. People accidentally miss markers. They do not accidentally cover multiple markers. Behind me, laughter erupted from the dock. Someone turned on music. The sound floated across the lake. Richard was already acting like the dispute was over. I took several photographs with my phone. Wide shots. Close shots. Marker numbers. Shoreline angles. Then I photographed the dock itself from 3 different positions. A few residents noticed. One woman lowered her sunglasses and watched me carefully. Another man stepped away from the railing and made a phone call. The atmosphere shifted. Small things started changing. I returned to my truck and opened my county property app. Parcel lines appeared over an aerial image of the lake. The dock sat directly inside my parcel. Not near it. Not touching it. Inside it. The structure extended farther than I expected. My stomach tightened when I saw the dimensions. This was not a simple fishing platform. It had enough slips and shoreline access to support regular community use. Maybe more. A pickup truck pulled into the parking area near the road. 2 contractors stepped out carrying measuring wheels. They headed straight toward Richard. He greeted them immediately. More work was coming. The dock was not finished. It was expanding. That changed everything. Every new board, every new post, every new improvement increased the stakes. I looked across the water one more time. Late sunlight reflected off the pilings like strips of gold. Then something caught my eye near the far edge of the structure. A small sign had been mounted beside the entrance. I could not read it from where I stood, but I knew I needed a closer look. The sign turned out to matter more than I expected. I walked closer until I could finally read the sign mounted beside the entrance. Community Waterfront Access Project. Beneath it sat the HOA logo and a list of board members. Richard's name appeared at the top in large letters. The sign looked expensive. Professional. Permanent. That bothered me. More than the dock itself. Temporary mistakes can be fixed. Permanent decisions usually leave a trail. I took several photographs. The evening light reflected off the metal surface. A fresh layer of clear coating still shined across the lettering. This project had money behind it. Real money. A boat engine rumbled across the lake. Laughter drifted from the slips. The place already felt established. That was exactly what Richard wanted. The longer people believed the shoreline belonged to the HOA, the harder it would be to change their minds later. I drove home just before sunset. My house sat less than a quarter mile from the water. The porch lights clicked on automatically as the sky turned orange. Inside my office, I unlocked a filing cabinet that had not been opened in months. Metal drawers slid outward with a heavy scrape. Folders filled the cabinet from top to bottom. Tax records. Utility maps. Shoreline maintenance permits. Survey reports. Old photographs. Decades of paperwork. I pulled out a box labeled Lake Property. Dust floated through the beam of a desk lamp. Somewhere outside, crickets had already started singing. I spent 2 hours sorting through documents. Most of them confirmed what I already knew. Then I found something different. A large envelope had slipped behind a stack of maintenance records years ago. The paper inside felt thick and brittle. Across the top was a date from nearly 12 years earlier. I unfolded it carefully. It was an aerial survey image commissioned after a shoreline erosion study. My eyes moved immediately toward the western edge of the lake. Toward my shoreline. Toward the exact area where the structure now stood. I leaned closer. Every property line had been overlaid onto the image by the survey company. Every marker. Every corner. Every shoreline boundary. The picture left no room for interpretation. The structure would have been entirely inside my parcel. Not partially. Entirely. I stared at the image for several seconds. Then I noticed something else. A small notation in the corner referenced a companion report. I searched the box again. 5 minutes later I found it. The report contained measurements, coordinates, and certified boundary confirmations. It even included photographs of the original shoreline markers before erosion repairs were completed. My heartbeat picked up. This was stronger than anything I had found so far. Much stronger. Outside, a truck passed on the county road. Headlights flashed across my office wall for a moment before disappearing. I scanned every page into my computer. Backup copies mattered. Especially now. Around 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed on the desk. A community social media notification appeared on the screen. Richard had posted an announcement. The HOA was planning a major waterfront celebration at the lake the following weekend. Hundreds of residents were already responding. Then I saw a detail that made me sit forward in my chair. The event flyer included a rendering of an even larger expansion. I stared at the event rendering on my computer screen long after the notification faded. The image showed far more than a simple lakeside gathering. Additional slips extended into the water. A covered pavilion sat near the shoreline. Decorative lighting lined walkways that crossed directly through areas marked as private property on my survey maps. Richard was not slowing down. He was accelerating. The next morning, I drove to the county records office. The building smelled faintly of paper, floor polish, and old air conditioning. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I signed in and requested every document connected to shoreline improvements around Lake Calder during the past 18 months. The clerk disappeared into the back room. Minutes passed. A printer clicked somewhere behind a wall. Then a stack of records landed on the counter in front of me. I carried everything to a reading table near a window. Sunlight stretched across the pages. Most of the files involved routine maintenance projects. Boat lifts. Erosion control. Small repairs. Then I found the application connected to the waterfront project. My eyes stopped on the signature page. Something felt wrong immediately. I compared it against other documents in the packet. The approval signature appeared different from the others issued by the same office. The shape of the letters changed. The spacing changed. Even the date format looked inconsistent. I looked again. Then a third time. The more I studied it, the less comfortable I became. A county employee walked past my table carrying folders. I asked a simple question about archived permit records. 10 minutes later another file arrived. This one contained older examples signed by the same official. The difference was obvious now. The signatures did not match. Not closely. Not even casually. I photographed every page. Outside the window, traffic moved slowly through town. Inside, the silence felt heavy. A small detail had just become a very large problem. By early afternoon I returned to the lake. Construction activity continued near the water. Workers unloaded materials from a trailer. Lumber knocked against metal ramps. A portable generator rattled in the background. Richard stood near the shoreline speaking with two vendors. He looked relaxed. Confident. He waved at residents arriving with coolers and folding chairs. The place already felt like a commercial destination. I stayed inside my truck and watched. Then I noticed another change. New signs had appeared near the entrance road. Reserved parking. Event access. Guest registration. Somebody was preparing for a crowd much larger than a neighborhood picnic. A few residents recognized my truck. Some looked uncomfortable. Others avoided eye contact completely. Rumors were already spreading. I could feel it. Later that evening, I forwarded the permit copies, survey records, aerial images, and photographs to an attorney I trusted. The attachment folder kept growing. Every document pointed in the same direction. Every new discovery raised the stakes. The sun had almost disappeared when my phone vibrated with an incoming email. It was not from my attorney. It was from a licensed surveyor. He had reviewed the coordinates I sent earlier. His message was short. Very short. But one sentence immediately caught my attention. He wanted to inspect the shoreline in person. I met the surveyor 2 days later just after sunrise. Thin fog drifted across the lake. The water looked smooth as glass. A pair of geese moved quietly along the shoreline. The surveyor stepped out of a white pickup truck carrying a tripod, a measurement rod, and a weathered equipment case. His name was Daniel Mercer. He shook my hand once and immediately looked toward the waterfront project. He did not waste time. Neither did I. We walked the shoreline together. Every few yards he stopped to examine markers, compare coordinates, and check elevation points. The electronic equipment emitted short beeps in the morning air. Small numbers flashed across the screen. Daniel barely spoke during the first hour. He simply worked. That silence made me pay even closer attention. Around mid-morning he stopped near the buried marker I had uncovered earlier. He crouched beside it and brushed away more dirt. Then he compared the coordinates against several reference points. The expression on his face changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. That caught my attention immediately. He stood and looked toward the structure extending into the lake. Then he checked the equipment again. A few minutes later he walked farther down the shoreline and repeated the process. The same result appeared. He did not explain yet. He just kept collecting data. Meanwhile the project continued growing. Trucks arrived throughout the day. Workers unloaded tables, lighting equipment, portable fencing, and decorative materials. Music played from speakers near the water. Residents wandered through the area carrying coffee and talking about the upcoming celebration. The atmosphere felt more like a business operation than a community gathering. Richard seemed to enjoy every second of it. He moved between vendors shaking hands and giving directions. Several times I noticed him pointing toward future expansion areas shown in the promotional renderings. Each gesture suggested confidence. Each new improvement increased potential liability. By noon, Daniel finally approached my truck. He placed several printed coordinate sheets on the tailgate. Wind rattled the paper edges. The lake sparkled behind him. He pointed at the first page. Then the second. Then the third. Every measurement matched. Every marker aligned. Every reference point confirmed the same conclusion. The structure sat deeper inside my parcel than even the aerial survey suggested. Not by inches. Not by a small technical discrepancy. By enough to remove any reasonable argument. Daniel looked directly at me. "There is no boundary dispute here," he said. "The location is clear." Those 6 words stayed with me. A speedboat crossed the lake in the distance. Its wake rolled toward shore and slapped against the pilings. Nearby residents continued preparing for the event, completely unaware of what the survey had just confirmed. Daniel gathered his equipment and promised to prepare a certified report. Before leaving, he handed me a business card and told me to expect the final package within a few days. As his truck disappeared up the access road, I looked back toward the water. Workers were installing another section of railing near the entrance. Then I noticed something I had not seen before. A banner hanging near the registration area advertised vendor booths, ticket sales, and sponsorship packages. The waterfront project was no longer just being used by the HOA. It was generating money. 3 days later, the certified survey package arrived at my house just after lunch. The delivery truck rolled away in a cloud of dust. I carried the envelope inside and placed it on my kitchen table. The paper felt heavier than it should have. Outside, the lake shimmered through the windows. Inside, the room was completely quiet. I opened the package carefully. The survey report was detailed. Coordinates. Measurements. Boundary confirmations. Photographs. Professional certifications. Every page strengthened the same conclusion. The shoreline belonged to me. The access area belonged to me. The structure sat inside my property. Daniel had documented everything. Nothing was left to interpretation. I spent the next hour reviewing every page. Then I scanned the entire report and forwarded copies to my attorney. Minutes later, my phone rang. He had already started reading it. His voice sounded calm. That was a good sign. Excited people make mistakes. Calm people build cases. He asked several questions about the timeline. When construction began. When I returned home. When I discovered the covered markers. I answered each one. The conversation lasted nearly 40 minutes. Before hanging up, he told me to keep documenting everything. Every photograph. Every sign. Every event advertisement. Every expansion. The project was growing faster than anyone realized. That evening I drove back to the shoreline. The atmosphere had changed again. Vendor tents now lined part of the access area. Delivery trucks moved in and out. Portable lighting towers stood near the water. Workers tested speakers that echoed across the lake. Music drifted over the shoreline. Families walked through the area carrying folding chairs. Children pointed toward boats tied to the slips. The place looked less like a neighborhood amenity and more like a commercial venue. Near the registration area, I stopped beside a display board filled with promotional material. Sponsorship packages. Vendor fees. Event schedules. Premium waterfront access passes. I read each page slowly. Numbers appeared everywhere. Ticket sales. Booth rentals. Advertising opportunities. Money flowed through nearly every part of the operation. A cool wind moved across the water. Nearby, 2 vendors discussed expected attendance. One estimated several hundred visitors. Another mentioned additional events later in the summer. That caught my attention immediately. This was not being treated as a one-time celebration. It was becoming a business model. Richard emerged from a tent a few minutes later. He wore the same confident smile I had seen since returning home. Several board members followed him. They laughed while discussing future improvements. Expansion plans. Additional slips. Larger gatherings. Permanent structures. Nobody sounded worried. Nobody acted cautious. The project seemed unstoppable from the outside. That confidence told me something important. Richard still believed he was ahead. As sunset approached, I returned to my truck and sat quietly for a moment. Orange light reflected across the lake. The water looked peaceful. The shoreline did not. My phone buzzed against the center console. A new email had arrived from my attorney. Attached was a formal summary of the survey findings. Beneath it was a short note. He believed another agency needed to review the file immediately. The next morning, a new set of calls would begin. The next morning started with phone calls. Lots of them. Coffee steamed beside my desk while sunlight crept across stacks of survey reports and photographs. My attorney had already forwarded the file package to several offices before most people around the lake were awake. The certified survey. The aerial images. The permit records. The photographs of the covered markers. Everything moved together as one file now. Nothing stood alone anymore. Outside, birds moved through the trees along the shoreline. Inside, my phone seemed to vibrate every 20 minutes. Some calls were routine. Others were not. One office requested additional photographs. Another wanted copies of the certified coordinates. A third asked for the timeline of construction. The questions became more detailed as the day progressed. That told me the file was being taken seriously. Meanwhile, the project near the lake continued growing. By afternoon, social media was filled with new announcements. Richard appeared in nearly every post. Smiling. Shaking hands. Standing beside banners and vendor booths. The upcoming celebration had become the biggest event the HOA had ever promoted. Hundreds of people had marked themselves as attending. Local businesses were sponsoring portions of the event. Food vendors advertised special menus. Boat owners discussed docking plans. Every update made the operation appear larger. Every update created a bigger public record. I saved screenshots of all of it. Later that day I drove toward the shoreline again. The access road was busier than I had ever seen it. Delivery trucks entered one after another. Workers unloaded portable stages, lighting rigs, folding tables, and audio equipment. Generators hummed steadily in the background. The smell of fresh lumber mixed with fuel and cut grass. Near the registration area, volunteers assembled welcome stations. The entire scene felt like preparation for a small festival. Richard stood near the entrance greeting visitors. Several board members followed him from one setup area to another. They looked proud, confident, certain of success. A resident standing nearby mentioned that tickets were almost sold out. Another talked about future waterfront events later in the year. I listened without saying much. The momentum around the project had become its own force. People wanted it to succeed. That made the situation more complicated. Not legally. Emotionally. Most of the residents believed they were supporting a community improvement. Very few understood the questions surrounding ownership and approvals. As the sun dropped lower, I parked near the old willow tree and watched the shoreline from a distance. The lake reflected gold and orange across the water. Music testing echoed from the speakers. Workers adjusted stage lighting. Boats rocked gently against the slips. The scene looked peaceful. Almost perfect. That was what made it dangerous. Appearances can hide a lot. My phone rang shortly before sunset. It was my attorney. His voice was calm again. He told me several agencies had acknowledged receipt of the file. Then he mentioned something else. One office had moved much faster than expected. Faster than anyone anticipated. After we ended the call, I sat quietly for a moment looking across the water. Then another notification appeared on my screen. Richard had just announced the exact time he planned to address the crowd during the celebration. The timing caught my attention immediately. The celebration arrived under clear skies and bright summer sunlight. By 8 o'clock that morning, vehicles already filled every available parking area near the lake. Volunteers directed traffic with orange flags. Vendors unloaded supplies. Boats drifted across the water. Music floated from speakers mounted near the stage. The entire shoreline buzzed with activity. I stayed back from the crowd and watched from a distance. The lake looked beautiful. The situation did not. Every new arrival added another layer to what had already become a very public event. Children ran between tents. Food vendors prepared grills. The smell of barbecue and fresh coffee moved through the air. Everywhere I looked, people were smiling. Most of them had no idea what sat beneath the surface of the project they were celebrating. Richard certainly looked pleased. He moved through the crowd shaking hands and posing for photographs. The board members followed him like a campaign team. Large banners hung near the waterfront. Sponsor logos lined the walkways. The stage overlooked the water. It looked professional. Expensive. Carefully planned. Around mid-morning I received another call from my attorney. I stepped away from the noise before answering. Wind rustled through the trees near the shoreline. Waves tapped softly against the pilings. His voice remained calm. That was becoming a pattern. Calm usually meant progress. He informed me that additional reviews had been completed. Several questions raised by the file had attracted attention. More importantly, documentation supporting ownership had been independently verified. Hearing that felt different. Not dramatic. Just solid. Like another piece locking into place. After the call ended, I stood quietly for a moment looking across the water. A speedboat crossed the lake and left a long wake behind it. Sunlight flashed off the waves. Then my phone vibrated again. This time the number was unfamiliar. I answered. A brief introduction followed. The caller confirmed receipt of materials connected to the shoreline dispute. Several questions were asked regarding timelines and photographs. I answered each one carefully. The conversation lasted only a few minutes. Before ending the call, the voice on the other end thanked me for preserving records and maintaining documentation. Then the line went quiet. I looked back toward the event area. Something had changed inside me. Not confidence. Not relief. Focus. The kind that comes when uncertainty starts disappearing. Throughout the afternoon the crowd continued growing. More boats arrived. More vendors opened. More residents gathered near the waterfront. Richard posted updates online every hour. Attendance numbers climbed. Photographers moved through the venue capturing promotional images. Everything appeared successful. Everything appeared stable. Yet beneath all of it, the file continued moving through channels most people could not see. Late in the afternoon, I received a message from my attorney containing only 2 sentences. The first confirmed that ownership findings were no longer being questioned. The second advised me to keep my phone nearby for the rest of the evening. That message stayed with me. As sunset approached, workers adjusted microphones on the stage. Rows of chairs filled with residents. The lake glowed gold beneath the lowering sun. Richard prepared for the speech he had been promoting all week. Then my phone lit up with a call I had been waiting to receive. The call came as the crowd settled into their seats facing the stage. I stepped away from the noise and answered immediately. The voice on the other end belonged to a county official who had reviewed portions of the file. The conversation was short, professional, direct. Several documents had been verified. Ownership records matched the certified survey. Supporting materials matched archived county data. Nothing in the file contradicted the property boundaries. When the call ended, I slipped my phone back into my pocket and looked toward the waterfront. The sun hung low above the lake. Golden reflections stretched across the water. Hundreds of people filled the event area. Music faded as the program began. Richard stepped onto the stage to applause. He smiled broadly and adjusted the microphone. Sponsor banners moved gently in the evening breeze behind him. Everything looked exactly the way he wanted it to look. Successful. Permanent. Untouchable. I stood near the outer edge of the crowd and watched. Around me, residents listened attentively. Vendors paused their conversations. Boats drifted quietly beyond the slips. The entire shoreline seemed focused on the stage. Richard began speaking about community growth, future improvements, shared spaces, long-term plans. The audience responded warmly. Several people applauded after nearly every major point. He looked completely comfortable. Then movement near the access road caught my attention. Several vehicles arrived almost unnoticed by most of the crowd. Doors opened. Conversation started. A few people exchanged documents. Nothing dramatic happened. No scene. No shouting. Just a visible shift. The kind that occurs when facts finally reach the same place as confidence. Word traveled slowly at first. A board member stepped away from the stage area. Another followed. Richard continued speaking, but his attention began drifting toward the shoreline entrance. The rhythm of the event changed. Subtle at first. Then more noticeable. Nearby residents started looking toward the road instead of the stage. Small groups began talking quietly among themselves. Questions spread faster than answers. The lake remained calm. The crowd did not. Minutes later, my attorney arrived and joined me near the edge of the gathering. He carried a folder that looked very familiar. Certified surveys. Property records. Supporting documentation. Months of assumptions now sat beside years of recorded facts. He did not need to say much. The work had already been done. The records spoke for themselves. As the evening continued, more residents learned why conversations were shifting. Some appeared surprised. Others looked frustrated. Several simply looked confused. Many had genuinely believed the project belonged where it stood. The truth turned out to be much less flexible than public opinion. Eventually the celebration lost momentum. Conversations replaced applause. Questions replaced speeches. The focus moved away from the stage and toward the underlying reality that had been sitting beneath the entire project from the beginning. The shoreline had never changed ownership. The surveys had never moved. The boundaries had never shifted. Only the assumptions had. Darkness slowly settled across the lake. Lights reflected off the water. Boats returned to their slips. Vendors started packing equipment. The crowd gradually dispersed. I remained near the shoreline for a few minutes longer. Cool evening air drifted across the water. The dock stretched into the lake exactly where it had stood all week. But everything around it felt different now. Richard had built confidence on a story. I had relied on records. In the end, records lasted longer. Justice is not loud. It is patient, documented, and inevitable.